good. Then we will dive in here. We've got lots to do today, and we've got a large task. The assignment I gave for myself today is to try to articulate what's going on in the contemporary art world today. That is a massive task. So I think I'll begin with just disclaimers. There's too much going on. So anything that I say in 2.5 hours or so is going to be partial, it's going to be slanted and biased, and I'm not going to get to everything. I think really, now that we've gotten up to at least the year 2000, we'll probably spend all of today in the last 10 years, looking at work from the last 10 years. Now that we've gotten up to 2000, really we could spend a whole nother course just talking about the last 10 to 15 years or so. Because I think there are important shifts that are happening, and there's a lot happening. So we could spend several classes just talking about what's going on in photography, just talking about what's going on in painting or sculpture or new media, video, so on and so forth. To begin with, I'll just say I feel totally overwhelmed, and totally overwhelmed with how many important things we'll leave out. But I think as I've started putting this together, I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to include some examples from painting, photo, sculpture, and so on. I think, however, for those of you who are in painting classes, you'll tend to get a pretty strong look at what's going on in painting today. I think similarly with photography. So I think I'm going to be slanted more towards installation, sculptural installation. I'll include photo and painting and those sort of things, some video. I'm going to try to touch a few things, but we'll probably slant more towards sculptural installation. And I think that's the kind of big splashy things that are going on right now tend to be in that world. Okay, so with that disclaimer in mind, let's try to set out a few guidelines, I suppose, and kind of re-enter the train of thought. One could say that mostly what we've been tracking in this semester is postmodernism, postmodern art, right? We began the semester with modern art, modernist art, which includes Pollock and Rothko, and I think into minimalism. I want to include minimalism in modernism, even though not everyone would. That I think is as an extension of modernist art, modernist thought. And from there, we looked at a lot of the sort of subversions or critiques of modern art that probably begin in Duchamp, but start to gain steam with Rauschenberg and Warhol, and move us into conceptualism and performance art and so on. You get all of these kind of critiques of modernist art and deviations from it. And so for lack of a better term, we have postmodernism as this overarching umbrella that includes a lot of those disparate things that are coming after modernism. But we get a lot of things in there. and that term certainly includes a lot of different things on a more broadly cultural basis. That we talk about postmodernism in philosophy and in sociology and in politics and so on. So it's a big kind of messy word, a big umbrella that holds a lot of different things. But if we had to summarize it very briefly, it's probably this, kind of that all postmodern thought and artwork has in common is that it tends to directly attack claims to totality. That's kind of a jargonish word, but totalities are overarching explanations. Sometimes we use the word meta-narrative to talk about an overarching narrative that explains the world. Postmodernism is going to, postmodern thought is going to attack most claims to totality, finality, authoritative explanations. They're going to go after and attack those in a variety of ways. And so you get the kind of famous phrase from Lyotard, a French postmodern theorist, who says postmodernism is waging war on totality. That's what it is. At the center of it is we wage war on totality. Why? Or how? I suppose there are a couple features that go along with that, waging war on totality. First is it's going to emphasize the ways that we're embedded in cultural, historical, linguistic situations, right? You don't just think on your own. Your identity doesn't just sort of come from, the womb or something. We're all significantly formed. What we think about, what we value, our patterns and routines in life are considerably embedded in a historical, cultural situation. Good? So postmodern thought and postmodern art is really going to go at showing how culturally relative a lot of what you think and a lot of what you value is. You think as a 21st century, middle-class American. And that's particular. That shapes very much the way that you think, the way that you value. Postmodern thought is really going to point that out. Because of that, it's going to, one of the kind of threads of it or facets of it is that it seems to kind of go after most notions of objectivity and truth and originality, ideas of kind of utopic solutions, sincerity, ideas of expression, authenticity, authentic expression, those sort of things. It's going to go after those all along the way saying, don't be so naive about the way that your authentic expression is based on all sorts of things, like the television that you watch. Don't be so quick to conclude that you're right about this or that you know exhaustively about a situation. Because let's backtrack and look at all of the things that sort of go into you knowing a thing. You kind of get the sense. You kind of get the idea there? Yeah, if you're culturally, historically, linguistically conditioned, then postmodernism is going to critique the ways that you arrive at certainties or arrive at certain conclusions. Yeah.
I was going to say, like, it sounds like Descartes is kind of really fueling the fire in a way for that technique.
Yeah, I mean, yes, in a way, Descartes fuels the fire for that. But in another sense, Descartes is the #1 guy that they're going after. Because Descartes' whole idea, or his whole system, seems to be this method of, I have been cast into doubt about all sorts of things. I've been cast into doubt about what I can know, who God is, what's true about the world, and my response is to remove myself to a warm, comfortable room and think through things one step at a time, trying to locate what can I be sure about. I can be sure that I exist because I'm asking the question to begin with. So that provides me a sure foundation, and then I build on top of it. So the Cartesian thought is often known as foundationalism, where you can secure for yourself a foundation, a logical foundation, and then logically construct a worldview and objectively kind of construct on top of that.
Did he do a very good job of actually coming to any
Well, I mean, we owe a lot of modern science to Descartes, a lot of modern mathematics. He made pretty strong arguments for the existence of God and so on and so forth based on this method. But he does, I mean, you're right in the sense that he includes, it's probably a problematic enterprise from the beginning. Very ambitious, right. He's very ambitious, and it's problematic at the beginning. So the postmodern critique of Descartes there are a lot of parts. You can kind of break him up at a lot of different points, but you could start with, what kind of foundation are you starting with? You're removing yourself to a warm, comfortable room. That already is extremely culturally, historically situated. Not all people can do that, and not all people would consider that a neutral place to start from. You're writing your philosophy in a certain language, and that language comes with certain assumptions and baggage and so on. This foundation that you've set for yourself might not be so objective or so neutral. Yeah. Good, and that's really the issue, I think, is that at the kind of root of postmodernism is this assertion that there's no neutral place to stand. There's no neutral place from which to do philosophy, no neutral place from which to make art or a practice in the market or whatever. There's no neutrality. Everything is already laden with values and laden with assumptions. But the question there, the next question should be, well, why? What is motivating this critique? What really is the heart of postmodernism? Why do you have such a problem with Descartes and with the various modernists? What's the issue for you? Why is it so important to assert that there's no neutrality? And the answer would be that these claims to totality, claims to objectivity and certainty, the claim of the ability to authoritatively explain why the world is the way that it is, those kind of claims have the greatest potential for oppressing people, is the idea, right? You're never so dangerous as when you think you're absolutely right. And so I think postmodern thought is, at its core, underneath all of it, the charges against it of being relativist and those sort of things, underneath all of that is an ethical sort of revolt. It is criticizing claims to totality or claims to authority for the sake of giving a voice to the people who get run over in the process. Right? So most postmodern thought will present itself as attacking power structures. It's going to talk a lot about inequality. It's going to talk a lot about imbalances in power, imbalances in wealth, and those sort of things. It's going to talk a lot about the ways that women are marginalized by traditional philosophy, traditional art making, the way that minorities, ethnic minorities are marginalized and oppressed by traditional conversations and so on. And so postmodern thought, postmodern art is going to go about critiquing and hacking away at the Western canon, at the kind of Western ways, because postmodernism is predominantly a Western movement that is self-critical, and it's going to go about hacking away at the canon, hacking away at the assumptions, the kind of traditional discourses and so on. And it's going to hack away at authority, the ability for anyone to stand in a place of authority over others. And that includes the author and the artist, which is why in a lot of postmodern thought, postmodern art, you have a dismissal of what the artist intended. The artist doesn't have the authority over what the thing means. The meaning is contained in the body, the social body, in the community, and so on. And the primary way it's going to do a lot of that, the primary way of doing things and doing these critiques, is through parody and irony and fragmentation, deconstruction, dismantling the way you expect a thing to go and work in order to draw your attention to it and call it into question, call your expectations into question, call social norms into question. And once again, the way that we go about doing that often is through irony and parody and so on. Okay, does that make sense as a kind of brief articulation of postmodern thought? A bit of a review from several weeks back, but I think worth kind of re-articulating because it'll get us going to where we're going today. I think it's important to notice that postmodernism is primarily a critical stance. It is critical. Its primary posture in the world is critical and ironic and self-protective, I think. It doesn't really affirm much. It's not very constructive. It's critical. Does that make sense? Its operations are primarily critical. So as we move forward in today, and as we look at a lot of the efforts to push past postmodernism and to start critiquing postmodernism, one of the major problems that is going to be pointed out over and over again is that postmodernism doesn't build a happy life on anyone's part. It is just a critical tool, but it's not constructive. All right, so we'll get into that in a bit. Just to kind of attach all of that talk to artworks, a lot of the work that we looked at, both in class and in the museums, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and that's when you can kind of, if you have to date postmodernism, you could probably date it from the 60s through the 90s. That's probably where you should date it. If you want to date it even more narrowly, you can date it the 70s through the 90s. The 60s are sort of transitionary in a lot of ways. But a lot of the work that we've seen is very cold, very kind of removed. There is little aesthetic value, and that is because it's purposefully withholding traditional aesthetics, traditional notions of beauty, traditional ways that art should be done, and so on, and makes simple kind of points very often, like language is not transparent. Language is loaded. Language is something. It is a thing. Language happens through sounds and marks and on paper and in a room. Those things aren't neutral. They are constructed. They've been decided on by the culture that you come from. And language, furthermore, is political. It's always tied to a political structure or an economic structure. So we get lots of language in postmodern art, like here, as far as the eye can see, which is, once again, ironic. It's an ironic phrase that it suggests you're looking as far as the eye can see, you're conjuring up images of a deep landscape and so on. But by writing it on the wall in this way, literally, as far as the eye can see is this wall. So if you take the phrase literally, you end up looking at the institution. You end up looking at the walls of the museum or of the gallery. And I think that's a pretty good example of how postmodern art is often wound up in, there's a real critical political edge to it, but it operates through kind of irony, parody, poking fun, humor, sort of laughing out the side of your mouth a little bit. And central to, I think, a lot of this is this strategy of interrupting expectations, placing things in unusual contexts, like an advertising sign that starts to read, "Protect me from what I want." It disrupts the normal flow of things as a way of drawing attention to it and criticizing the normal flow of things. And certainly much postmodern work is going to go after the block of images that inform your imagination, shape your imagination. Hollywood is going to be a prime target. So we saw this painting at the Geffen. This is Ed Ruscha putting you on the other side of Hollywood. Sort of looking over the sign that tells Hollywood what it is, reassures itself of what it is. He puts us on the outside of it to see the sort of glow. He sort of disrupts, or I guess in some ways calls for us to get outside of it. We saw this painting, just to include a couple that we've seen in museums. We saw this last field trip at the Getty, where you have a gas station that I think, not accidentally, is a standard. It's proclaiming a standard, or itself as the standard. This is very sort of artificial, almost a kind of movie mock-up or a set or something. A standard gas station. So it's a standard, a cultural standard, but it's not neutral. It's very constructed. It's very cleaned up. It's very tied into with those lights kind of flashing around, the Fox searchlight sort of lights going around. Our standards are tied up with images and economic structures and so on. And with a lot of this work, as is, I think, fairly obvious, you're going to get a lot of critique of the history of images, historical depictions of women, which this is a kind of spoof on Raphael painting.
Well, because Cindy Sherman's the one who makes herself look like the painting that takes pictures.
Yeah. This is a picture, it's a photo of a Raphael painting.
Oh.
Yeah. And as we saw, there are going to be pretty consistent critiques of how we narrate history. So we looked at Fred Wilson, kind of mining the museum, revising the museum. And so out of kind of feminist art, you get a parallel critique that's coming from like Romare Bearden in this instance, kind of repackaging, reprocessing popular images of African Americans. And so you're going to get a strong emphasis in postmodern art on the mass-produced image. As one of the things, at least on the visual, in the visual world, in the visual arts, is one of the systems that is kind of dramatically affecting the way that we think and the way that we value things. Good? And I think this brings up a perhaps the initial definition of postmodernism I gave you was a little stuffy, a little academic. It's pretty stuffy and academic. I think this might help. This is a better definition, I think. One of the best that I know of. This is by an author named Umberto Eco, who writes about everything. He's a phenomenal guy. He writes novels and he writes art history and he writes philosophy and everything. Anyway, here's his definition, I think, of postmodernism. I think of the postmodern attitude as that of a man who loves a very cultivated woman and knows he cannot say to her, "I love you madly," because he knows that she knows, and that she knows that he knows, that these words have already been written by Barbara Cartland. Do you know who Barbara Cartland is? I didn't think any of you were. This is Barbara Cartland. It sort of says everything you need to know about Barbara Cartland, and she writes books like this, 5 Complete Works of Love and Luxury. So you get the 5 titles of the novels, and I actually kind of love that they all run together as one sentence. Love climbs in from hell to heaven, caught by love riding to the moon. Diana and the Dalmatian. Okay, anyway, so Eco is saying is that the postmodern attitude is like someone who loves a woman madly, but can't say to her that he loves her madly because those words have already been written by Barbara Cartland. So if you say to someone, I love you madly, you're quoting from the most sentimental and awful kind of pop culture. So something as deep and as important as loving another has in some ways been undercut by the barrage of mass media and sentimentality that's tied up in it. Still, he says, there is a solution. He can say, as Barbara Cartland would put it, I love you madly. At this point, having avoided false innocence, as though he's pretending he didn't know Barbara Cartland already used those words, having said clearly that it is no longer possible to speak innocently, he will nevertheless have said what he wanted to say to the woman, that he loves her, but he loves her in an age of lost innocence. What's that? You're confused? I was trying to define postmodernism with a story. How is this the postmodern attitude? What is this? Put it in your own words.
Trivialized meanings.
Trivialized meanings, yeah. And what trivializes meanings?
Culture and context.
Yeah, good. The meaning of something as personal as I love you becomes trivialized because we hear it too much, and we hear it in sort of awful situations, like a Barbara Cartland novel, which love becomes such a thin and pathetic thing to be pretty uncharitable to Barbara Cartland. It becomes a thin and pathetic thing. And so for me to say, I love you madly, suggests that I'm referring to the thin and pathetic thing. So I don't want to use that word or that phrase. So what do I use? You had me at hello. No, I can't do that. That's awful. And you start to kind of pull back the number of, or the ways that you can articulate yourself, and the ways that you can articulate yourself honestly and genuinely, because it is so in danger of coming off as thin and pathetic, sentimental. You know what I mean? Yeah? So what's our primary way of operating in this context? You are all aware of it. It's irony and cynicism, right? You protect your vulnerability, you protect your genuine statements to people, you protect your sincerity, I suppose, by making sure that whoever you're talking to knows that you're not referencing the pathetic thing or the sort of thin way of loving a person. And so we have a very ironic and sarcastic culture, especially youth culture. Is incredibly ironic and sarcastic. And I think we see it in the various ways that we relate to each other. On Facebook, it's just embarrassing for someone to say something sincere on Facebook, right? Because it's Facebook. Like, I'm saying the sincere thing for everyone, and it's sort of everywhere, and it will probably sound like some other cheesy, sincere thing that someone said. And so we don't say sincere things on Facebook. We say clever things on Facebook, right? You sit and think, what's the most clever, kind of funny way that I can say this thing that I want to say? good job. I'm glad I'm glad your show went so well, or so. Sometimes we can say those sort of things, but usually it has to be something more clever, so that it doesn't come off as being sort of falsely or naively sincere. Does that kind of get some traction with you? Was there a hand up somewhere? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I would just say that it also points out that our language is embedded in references, so that you almost, like, you can't really even talk sincerely ever, because your language is proceeding from these various cultural
Right.
references.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so the kind of cash value of that is that it's hard to be sincere without coming across as naive and sentimental. Yeah, good. Anyone else want to clarify that? Is that making a little more sense? A little better? That's okay. Okay, good. I think that pretty nicely articulates the postmodern attitude in my mind, and it places all of us in it. I mean, if this is the postmodern attitude, I think most of us share in that because of the context that we live in, and in that context, you can see why so much contemporary art is ironic and cynical and sarcastic. And often it does it in sort of the most elaborate ways by presenting false forms of sincerity. Like Jeff Koons does, all of his work is preoccupied with this. Large, naively sincere monuments that are trite and childish and sarcastic, I think, because of that. Love is a packaged chocolate, and he makes monuments to this kind of trite exchange of love, and calls it a sacred heart. There's no more sort of trite way to represent a sacred heart than in this way. And Koons' work will do a lot of this appropriating of popular images, you know, a mermaid and the Pink Panther, and we're going to put them together in this sort of incoherent, I don't know, what is it? What kind of situation is it? I don't know. A mermaid, I don't know. Is Pink Panther kind of the animated cartoon here, or is he just a stuffed animal? I don't know. The whole thing is just sort of a monumental exercise in sarcasm. And so I think much of the most interesting postmodern artwork is going after the way that our tales, our stories tend to be a piecing together and rearrangement of received media images, for instance. And so a lot of work from the 70s and 80s especially kind of looks like a blender. Like a bunch of images from all over places, traditional paintings, traditional African artwork, porn, whatever else we get here, Lucian Freud painting, just gets all blended up into one kind of overwhelming noise, cacophony of these images that are strung together incoherently. The harder you look, the harder you look. Sarcasm and criticism is the primary posture of postmodern artwork, I think. I want to then call some of this into question. I mean, certainly we have to say the postmodern thought has had a lot of positive effects. I think it has. Postmodern thought has criticized things that really need to be criticized and did need to be criticized. I think it's done a pretty helpful job of highlighting the ways that our habits of mind and heart and body are shaped by cultural outlets, media, music, so on. I think it does a good job of highlighting those things. I think postmodernism has identified arguably idolatrous notions of objectivity and certainty and authority, individualism, neutrality. I think there are a lot of ways that modernist thought was assuming too much about how objective it was, how objective science is, for instance, how much human reason and human progress can accomplish and is a good thing on its own grounds. I think postmodernism has sort of cut off at the knees a lot of those perhaps idols, potentially idols. And I think it's also done a pretty decent job in some ways, in a variety of ways, in a lot of ways, of critiquing real injustices in the world, right? It went after people that needed to be gone after. And it went after ways, really unhealthy ways that I think women were pictured and treated in the world. I think it's gone after really unhealthy ways that we tended to treat others. And so I think postmodernism has been really good on a lot of those points. However, postmodernism, as we've already said, tends to traffic in the critical, cynical, ironic way of being in life. And that's not a healthy way of being in life, I don't think. You can't live in cynicism as a healthy human being. I think I had this experience in the 90s. So I went to college in the 90s, high school and college in the 90s. And punk was big in the 90s. Punk is a kind of quintessential postmodern movement that whose posture is totally critical. I mean, there is nothing affirmative about punk rock music. Every once in a while you get a love song or something. Other than that, it is critical, and it is aggressively critical. And I think I was, you know, I don't know if I was a punk rocker, but I listened to a lot of the music and went to a lot of the shows, and at some point, at the end of the 90s, I said, I am tired of being angry. And I'm tired of being cynical. Actually, I think that happened a little later, 2005 or so, 2004. I'm tired of being cynical. I'm tired of being critical of everything, because that's not a healthy way to live. And I think we could say that more generally about a lot of sectors of our culture, that postmodern thought, while it's done a good job of criticizing certain things, hasn't done such a good job, and certainly art hasn't done such a good job, of cultivating the virtues, the human virtues of that we care most about, like love and beauty and generosity and hospitality, sincerity, faith, hope, and so on. Those are not really a kind of the words that would come to mind to talk about postmodern art, right? So I think if we're going to talk about today with the rest of the class this morning and this afternoon, if we're going to talk about what's going on now, I think what's going on is, in a lot of different ways, people, artists, philosophers, and so on, trying to move past postmodernity, the postmodern stance of critical cynicism and irony, to something more constructive. And to offer something more constructive is vulnerable, and it is difficult. And there are a lot of other points, I think, that we could critique postmodern thought. I'm not going to go into them because I think it might be a distraction. There are lots of other ways that we could criticize it. But I think one of the main thing that I'll offer up here is that we want to be healthy humans individually and as a culture, and we've got to start making artwork, and we've got to start behaving towards each other in ways that are more marked by love and beauty and generosity. So in the contemporary arts, there are a lot of people who are trying to bring those things back in, and they go by a number of names. All of it is sort of postmodern, and that's sort of a goofy way of titling a period of time. But all of the other words that or phrases that have been attributed to it are equally goofy. So there are a lot of things going on right now. I'll throw out a couple, all of which are still parasitical on modernism. Certainly there are people who are saying what we're in now is a hyper-modern age in a lot of ways. It's not so much postmodern, but it's become hyper-modern. And there are certainly sectors of our culture that certainly could be called hyper-modern. And by hyper-modern, I mean an even more amplified reliance on science and technology to, I don't know, explain who we are and secure a good future, right? Science, biology, biological engineering. There's a lot of that stuff going on right now that is really hyper-modern and just hasn't even felt the impact of postmodernism, it seems like. There are other people who are saying one of the things that's going on right now is not really a modernism or a postmodernism, it's sort of a pseudo-modernism. That it's marked by this kind of shallowness and triteness that goes along with our increasingly advancing technologies. So we relate to each other increasingly in short, misspelled phrases through the internet and mobile phones and so on. And so our relationships to people are all mediated by clicking and surfing and doing those sort of things, texting. And there are at least some people who want to refer to that as a kind of pseudo-modernism. It's a culture of superficiality. I don't think that is what's going on in certain quarters of our culture, but probably not everywhere. One of the readings I gave you for today was by a guy named Nicolas Bourrieux, is how you pronounce that last name. He is a curator from London. He lives in London, and the reading that I gave you is called the Altermodern Manifesto. He wants to say that where we are now and where we're going is into a kind of altermodernism, where we need to start being constructive in the way that modernism presumed itself to be, but we have to take on board all of the kind of critiques, the right critiques of modernism that postmodern leveled, and start a new kind of modernism, an alternate modernism, an altermodernism, that is one that starts from a globalized situation, a globalized condition. There are other people who are calling things a variety of ways. I don't want to go into all of them, but there are some people calling for a re-modernism, a rebirth of beauty, a rebirth of traditional attitudes towards aesthetics and so on. Some people are calling it a meta-modernism. I don't know. There's this movement called the New Sincerity that are just these people that's like, let's just be sincere to each other. And I'm going to make art that is sort of grossly sincere and not worry about it. At any rate, I think a lot of what's going on, a lot of these kind of calls to move past postmodern thought, common to all of those is a request that we have renewed places for sincerity and faith and love and beauty. Those tend to be the things that you see most often. Our art has become ugly. Our art has become uncharitable. Our art has become sparse. This, by the way, that I'm showing you is an artwork. This one, I think it was the 2007 Turner Prize, and it's called Lights Going On and Off. There's something hollow and missing about a lot of this postmodern art that got so wrapped up in its own cynicism, criticality, it's not offering anything to kind of the human values we want. Okay, so I'm going to fly through a bunch of artists who are working in this century, in this decade, and just sort of talk over the top of them. So I think if you want a deeper engagement with any of these, you'll have to go back and do it. We'll say a couple things about them, but I'm just going to slide over the top of a lot of people. And this afternoon, then I'll start digging in more carefully with a couple of artists. One of the things that's going on, I think, today is a continued critical posture. There's still a lot of this kind of work that is critiquing global politics and international politics and so on. This is a guy named Yinka Shonibare. He's born in Nigeria but is based in London right now. And this, pretty straightforwardly, is called How to Blow Up Two Heads at Once. And what's going on here? You have these two kind of elaborately dressed noblemen without heads in this standoff, a kind of colonial standoff or a Cold War standoff or something. And Shonibare has a lot of his work looks like this, these sort of little vignettes that include pretty elaborately constructed clothing. I mean, in some ways it's related to fashion, but pretty elaborately constructed clothes that all seem to be taking their imagery from Enlightenment era, modernist era thought values. So he has this whole series called The Age of Enlightenment. This is his rendering of Immanuel Kant. What's that? Yeah. And so here's Kant, you know, critiquing reason, pure reason, and critiquing aesthetic judgments and so on, but doing so from a particular cultural position, one of relative affluence and privilege. And he does a similar thing with all of these Enlightenment thinkers, Adam Smith. And interestingly, I think, I mean, these are all Enlightenment figures, and he has left off the head, emphasizing their bodies, their bodily positions in the world, the clothes they wear, their studies. It's their bodily position he's emphasizing, regardless of the head, or independently of the head, so to speak. And so I could think, sticking with this critical line that is still running today, but you seem to get more of a playfulness about it. The criticism is a little bit more playful, less cynical, I think, and more aesthetically rich, I think. The kind of conceptualism of the 70s that's cold and dry is sort of a thing of the past, I think, for the most part. Here's Tom Friedman. This is called an untitled dollar bill. It's $1 bill, but it's made up of, as you can see here, 36 different $1 bills that he has cut up into this, using this pretty precise grid that he cuts these up, reassembles them into one giant dollar bill. How do you make sense of that? I mean, what does this look like to you? I mean, it kind of looks like a pixelized dollar bill, but what makes it pixelized? I mean, they're made up of dollar bills, actual objects, but as you grow these things into a larger image or a larger system, the thing gets increasingly abstract. Yeah. I don't think it's legal, so I don't know. I don't know how he did this, but I don't think it's legal. Well, I don't know. But it becomes this, as you blow it up, it becomes this increasingly abstract, pixelated thing. He also does so with kind of consumer packaging, a cereal box, or 9 cereal boxes that he cuts up very precisely and pieces back together to form one mega cereal box. And I think not coincidentally, it is a total. It's a totality, sort of pun on that postmodern idea. He's making a totality out of concrete pieces. But the totality here is consumer packaging. It's an image that contains and sells cereal. Why does it need the box? Why does it need all this lettering? I don't know, because that's how we buy things. We buy totalities through images, I guess. And there does seem to be, I want to put some of these at the beginning, this sort of continuation of a critical stance that seems to kind of have a continuation of postmodernism, not postmodernity. This is a guy named Chris Martin, who's a Belgian. This is not the Chris Martin of Coldplay. Isn't Coldplay the lead singer, Chris Martin? Is that right? Yeah. This is not him, just in case you're wondering. A kind of post-conceptual artist, if you will, a conceptual artist today. Each time he displays this thing, it's a Ming Dynasty ceramic vase that he did not make, but he displays it, and every time he displays it, he positions it in the room and pushes it over, and it shatters, and he glues it back together. So every time he exhibits it, it is a reconstruction of a broken thing. And so it continues to break more and more and accumulate more and more glue, I guess, trying to hold together this artifact from the past. And he does a lot of things that do seem to be pointing us to the institution, the art institution, still, and that's a kind of typical postmodern stance. This is called TYFFSH, which, as I understand it, changes when he exhibits it. It's "thank you for flying," and then it's the name of the gallery, like Mark Fox, when he showed here in LA this work at Mark Fox. "Thank you for flying, Mark Fox." So it's an identification of the air balloon, hot air balloon, with the gallery, and I think you can enter into it and it's being blown up, but there's this kind of failure that is here that seems to be presented, a failure of the gallery system, or a failure of the gallery to really hold the aspects of life that really make life enjoyable and interesting, that the hot air balloon functions when you're using it. When you bring it into the gallery, it dies or something like that. And he has, I think he's a clever artist in a lot of ways, and seems to extend this kind of criticism. There's some political criticism, some criticism of the art institution, but does so in fairly, I don't know, clever and fun ways. Like bells. What are bells used for? What are bells associated with? with note-taking. And with church, the sacred, associated with liberty, and so on. When you weld two bells together like this, it becomes this insulated thing that removes any function. It keeps the bells from functioning. So it's this kind of inbred bell, if you will, or insulated bell. One more from Chris Martin. Are you familiar with this sculpture? Sort of. It seems somewhat familiar. But it's not, there's something missing. Yeah, it's based on Laocoon, which we discussed at the beginning of this course as being this kind of ideal sculpture. Chris Martin does it and removes the snake, or the snakes. And it is a weird thing, huh? This story of Laocoon and his sons dying under a curse from the gods. A curse from Athena, I think it is. Curses him, curses them, and the serpent, the sea serpents, grab him, kill him. What does it do when Martin removes the snake? There's this sort of struggling, agonizing, but there's nothing there. There's just a sort of general anxiety or general struggle. Maybe we could read it as this kind of iconic image of Greek art, high Hellenistic Greek art that has all of the divinity gone and all of the kind of grappling with the gods gone, if you will. But what remains is just a general anxiety and struggle with oneself. Perhaps that's going on here. A couple other examples of kind of postmodern art that's still disentangling itself from this general feeling of malaise and pessimism. This is by an artist, a British artist named Simon Starling. He has kind of come to fame in the last couple years. He won the Turner Prize, the British Tate Turner Prize in 2008, I think it was, or 9. This is called Autoxylopyrocycloborus. And what this is a video of a performance. The artist salvaged a sunken boat from Scotland, a lake in Scotland, and he salvages it, he sort of gets it seaworthy again, and equips it with a steam engine, and is trying to cross this lake only with the steam engine and by burning the boat itself. So can he cross the lake using powering with a powered steam engine, this kind of image of modernist technology? The steam engine totally changes Western culture. The sort of icon of modernist technology, he's going to power it with all he has in the structure itself, the boat. So it's a structure that undermines itself. And you can get a certain ways with this, but eventually he doesn't make it. And so I think you can kind of regard this as a sort of parable of a self-destructive system, a self-destructive structure. And I think specifically, again, he's going after a steam-powered culture, I guess. a self-destructive structure. Doris Salcedo is a pretty compelling artist working today. This is her work for the Istanbul Biennial, or Biennial, or Biennale. And I think that's worth pointing out, that one of the things we get in the last 20 years especially is a huge expansion of the art world. I mean, the center of the art world all through the second half of the 20th century is undoubtedly New York. New York City is the center of the international art world. Now New York is prominent, but London is extremely prominent, Berlin is extremely prominent, and there are a number of cities outside of the Western world that are becoming important art centers, like Istanbul, Turkey. There's a lot going on in India right now, a lot in Korea. There's a huge show at LACMA a couple years ago of sort of hot new Korean artists. There's a lot going on in China and so on. Doris Salcedo is a Colombian, here showing in Istanbul, the Istanbul Biennial. And what do you see here? What is this? Chairs. A lot of chairs. Almost 1,600 chairs. And they're all positioned as though they're in line with the storefronts, right? The face of the buildings. You have a building that had been torn down, so there's this empty hole, and she fills it with chairs in this way. Why? What does that do? How do you read this? Of what? Abandonment, yeah, good. These chairs have just been tossed. They feel tossed sort of recklessly into the hole. Good. And so what's being abandoned? Chairs. I mean, it seems like all kind of traditional wooden chairs, they seem to have some age to them. She didn't just go out and buy 1,600 chairs from IKEA and then throw them in there. They seem to be traditional chairs. So an older culture, yeah. 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 Yeah.
And then this sort of like absence of the people, absence of like the building, and just all you have left is like this sort of weird skeletal chair.
Yeah.
Like, or what would have been like people's homes or lives, or like presence of those people.
Yeah, and once she does that, this suddenly takes a pretty dark turn, huh? I mean, once you start, are these people standing for people? Then this suddenly becomes like a mass grave, huh? It's like a visual rendering of a mass grave. Yeah, yeah. And so to put it in line with in line with the normal city street and the storefronts, the face of the apartments and so on, she sort of puts this mass grave in the middle of a city. It's fairly haunting and fairly apocalyptic, or fairly preoccupied with war, or with atrocity, with violence, international violence. I mean, certainly more people than this have filled in mass graves in the past a few decades. And Salcedo does seem to have this really heavy artistic practice. Are any of you familiar with the Turbine Hall at the Tate in London? Yeah, some of you. There are a few places you can go, as I was considering what do I include today. I mean, a couple of the sort of centers. You can see what's showing at major museums in New York and LA, right? Go look at the list of exhibitions at the MoMA or the Guggenheim or something, and you'll find really prominent contemporary artists working today. You can also go to the Tate, and the Tate has a lot of different, in London, has a lot of different programs. One of its programs is that it has this massive, massive turbine hall. It formerly was they built turbines or something there. And they commission a different contemporary artist, maybe every 6 months or so, to do a massive, large-scale installation. I'll show you a couple of these, but Doris Salcedo, when she got it, she cracked the foundation of the Tate. Or did she? She didn't, I suppose she didn't really, but it really looks like it. She created this crack running through the center of the museum. And it runs for quite a ways. She titles it shibboleth, which, if you're not familiar with that word, a shibboleth is a kind of distinguishing practice of a specific region or something like that. Like it's a word or a practice that is specific to a regional location. And is usually identified with a people group, if you will, like a shibboleth. The way you use that word tells me you're from Canada. That's a sort of shibboleth. It's kind of local jargon, if you will. So she titles this shibboleth a cracking foundation, the Modern Art Museum with a cracked foundation. And I still don't really understand how she did this, because this thing is fairly deep. I mean, it goes down several feet and is just this giant crack running through the museum, which seems to be, once again, a kind of continuation of a sort of postmodern critical attitude, criticizing the institution as being flawed, cracked at its foundation, for whatever that's worth. And I think this attention, that heightened attention to culture, cultural institutions, cultural norms that we get in postmodernism continues through a lot of work going on today, but does so in different ways we haven't seen before. This is an artist named Jason Salavon, who's a photographer, though he doesn't take many of his own photos. He more takes photos. He doesn't take photos. This is called Portrait Rembrandt. And what do you see here? How would you describe this? I mean, it kind of looks like a Rembrandt portrait, right? But what's wrong with it? Yeah, you're getting close. That's not quite what he does, but you're on the right track. Yeah, he takes 100 Rembrandt paintings in this case, takes 100 of them, has high-resolution digital scans of them, and he's constructed this computer program that can analyze every pixel of the image and add up the sort of color for all 100 pixels for that one pixel from all 100 paintings, and then calculate the average color for all 100 of the paintings at that pixel. Does that make sense? And so then he prints it out. It's a digital photo, a digital print that is the average of all Rembrandt, or at least 100, or maybe it's all, Rembrandt portraits. And what you get is something. You get a portrait, but the portrait is not of Rembrandt. The portrait is of the formula or the convention for painting portraits. what you see here, what he depicts, is not a specific person, but a norm, an average, a convention. And he does this not only from art history, but from popular images, from the public images that he mostly takes off of the internet. Takes these images, here are 100 special moments, these are kids with Santa, and he loads these into his program, and you get the average of these 100 interactions with Santa. And what you see is a remarkable consistency. There's a norm there. There's a formula almost for how we picture kids with Santa. And that's what he is giving to us, the cultural norm, not the specific people involved. The specific people involved are all participating in a common cultural norm. That seems to be his idea, his implication. And it's interesting to note the artistic practice here. What does Salavon do? He doesn't really, well, the thing he makes is a computer program. He's a programmer, is what he is. He is a computer programmer who selects images, selects them. The artist as this kind of person who surfs and clicks and texts and those sort of things. He surfs the web and compiles and averages these images. But I think his work is interesting. It's not just sort of highlighting these cultural norms for the sake of criticizing them. I don't think that's what's happening here. Because they're all, or a lot of them, are things that are important to us, right? Like marriage, and little leaguers, and kids enjoy going to see Santa, and so on. These are things that tend to be important to us, but they have norms at work in them. And I think that's a more complex, more interesting thing to say than just to sort of, you know, here are the cultural norms that you're living by, and I hack away at them because they're oppressive or something like that. No, a lot of norms that we live by are good for us. A lot of tradition are good, and it's okay that we're shaped by them, but when we become conscious of them, we become conscious of how they're shaping us, for better or worse. He does a similar thing with homes, taken out of the for sale signs, for sale ads, and does them for different locations. So I guess this is the average of 114 homes being sold in Dallas-Fort Worth area. Here's Miami. And he is certainly also aware of not just kind of public domain photography, but also media. So these are the late night hosts, at least they were at the time. Who is it? Leno, Letterman, and Conan, I think. And he took, I think, 100 of their opening monologues and averaged all of the pixels once again. So you get this average moving image. So they are just all layered. So you get them giving their monologues in an average way. There's a real consistent average, evidently. And then all of the voice, all the sound is also averaged. So you get this. There's really kind of haunting, disturbing. And this heightened awareness of cultural frames and how they influence the way we think, interact with each other, certainly goes back to the gallery once again. But there's been, I think, a movement more often lately toward at least what Nicolas Bourriaud calls relational aesthetics. He wrote a book in the late 90s called Relational Aesthetics, same guy that wrote Altermodern Manifesto that, for your reading. And he says that relational aesthetics, what's happening more lately, is since postmodernism heightens our awareness of cultural frames of reference on thought and friendship and interaction, as we move past it, we continue that heightened awareness, but the artwork starts from those social interactions, or from those relations, those social relations. So this is a guy named Walid Beshti. He's a Los Angeles-based artist. And what he does is, he does a lot of things. The photos on the back wall are photographs that he takes on film, and then as he travels, he includes them in the suitcases that get run through the X-ray machines, and it screws them up, and then he prints them, because it's the process for them getting there. It's the sort of, it's evidence that that these don't just hang on a wall neutrally, they've come from somewhere, and they've gone through certain processes. And same for his minimalist sculptures. His minimalist sculptures look an awful lot like the Larry Bell cube we saw at the Getty our last trip. He basically makes the same things, these Larry Bell minimalist glass cubes, and then he mails them. And he lets whatever happened to them happen, and he mails them to the gallery. So he mails them to the gallery, and their instructions are to unpack the cube and to exhibit it on the box that it was shipped in as the pedestal. So you get a removal of the pedestal, the traditional kind of art gallery pedestal that sets it aside, sets it apart from the rest of the world, but rather the pedestal positions it back into the world in a way. Evidence of the kind of cultural rivers that it has come through, the hands that it has gone through. This probably isn't very good press for FedEx, but this is probably not the average thing that you ship either. And so I think it's a critique of minimalism and so on, but I don't know that critique is heightened as much as the social networks that support the gallery. And you get lots of these. And this heightened, I'll show you just a couple more here. This heightened sense of people, other people outside of the art galleries being involved in the work, I think marks much of what's going on right now. There's much more of an impulse towards art making as having to do with everyday life in one way or another, and it's tied into everyday life. This is an artist named Ai Weiwei. Some of you familiar with him? He's been very much in the news this last year. He's probably the most prominent Chinese artist working today, and he's been really outspoken against the Chinese government, and they are not happy with that. So he gets hassled a lot. That's an understatement. He gets hassled by them. He got arrested earlier this year and just disappeared, thrown in prison for 2.5 months, I think, 3 months off the top of my head. They tore down his studio. Anyway, he's a fascinating character. Look into him more. In the Tate Turbine Hall, where Doris Salcedo did the giant crack, he did this, and this was last year, late last year, about a year ago. And this is 100 million hand-painted sunflower seeds made out of porcelain. And he filled the turbine hall with these sunflower seeds that all refer not so much to him, but to lots and lots of people who have had their hands on these and constructed them, made them, painted them. And I think there's something going on here about the seeds. They're sort of dead. They're dead flowers in a way, or reference dead flowers, but they're also seeds, so they seem to imply new growth or future growth, a future. And much of his work directly has to do with Chinese history, Chinese culture. So one seems to kind of want to refer all of these back to these sort of artisans, workers who are making things like this, turning out things like this. And these have been shown in a couple of different places. It was very popular when it showed in London. And Ai Weiwei seems to, a lot of the work seems to have this collective entity, like that the seeds are somehow associated with people, fields and fields of people, 100 million people, the masses. And he seems to handle that in other ways, like with these bicycles that all share wheels. So they're kind of this single entity, multiple individuals that are kind of a singular entity, a common destiny. But it's also sort of futile. There's a futility here, huh? Perhaps going in circles. Although if you're going in circles together, perhaps that's not such a bad thing. It might be better to go in circles together than to journey to far off places on our own. You know, a lone ranger. And that ethos of connecting with people, having the work more connected with other people, not so much just the artist genius or something like that, although the artist, the organizer is the one who often, whose name gets associated. But this ethos of kind of the artwork being connected to people and growing out of the people and kind of yearning for something seems to be pretty common right now. This is an artist named El Anatsui. Any of you familiar with him? Yeah, a little bit. He's a Nigerian artist, and he makes these massive textiles, is how they read. But they are textiles made out of aluminum bottle caps, but not just bottle caps like from a Coke bottle. These are like the tops and the sides of labels for liquor bottles. And so you have in these textiles a massive number of presumably emptied liquor bottles, which seems to represent a group of people, one would presume, hurting or depressed or hopeless or something. I don't know. I guess you could associate this with partying, but like celebration. But I don't know that it's so much celebration. I mean, it's a beautiful thing, but it seems to be a beautiful thing that has a sort of dark underside to it, a dark past, a darkness that's implied behind it. Like a hard liquor. It's not so much always a celebratory thing, especially if you put it in African context, in which slaves were often purchased with hard alcohol, whiskey, especially back in the day. So these are often read as being kind of growing out of him collecting items from African culture that have perhaps a negative aspect to the contemporary African culture and a negative aspect to the traditional African culture, is that it's wrapped up in slavery and some of the effects of slavery. And then he seems to collect them from there, but then I guess redeem them in a way, knit them back together, knit them into this fabric that perhaps suggests warmth or clothing or traditional African textiles. They're pretty remarkable. And they come in a variety of different formats, different labels. These are labels that go around the side of the neck rather than on the top. And I want to do one more, and then we'll break. I think where I'm going here is this movement, increasing movement away from a postmodern cynicism or sarcasm and critique to something that's postmodern that seems to be really interested in human concerns. I don't know how else to say that. They seem to be more constructive, redemptive, if you will. So we'll end with this. And they seem to be more community-based, community-oriented. This is made by a group called Núcleo de Arte, and they are based in Mozambique. And what they did, there's been this program in Mozambique over the last couple decades, last decade. I don't know how long it's been going on. And the program is called Transforming Arms into Tools. And so I don't know, I still don't entirely know who runs this organization or this program, but this art group is in one way or another connected to it. And what this program does is it exchanges guns for tools or equipment. So sewing machines, building materials, bicycles. Evidently there was one town that turned in so many guns that they received a tractor. And this comes on the heels of an extended civil war in Mozambique, where they weren't just fighting with others, they were fighting internally and killing each other. These communities, these villages killing each other, fighting with each other. And so this, they eventually kind of negotiate peace, and then their next move was, we need to start reconstructing our lives and our villages and being at peace with each other. And so let's form a way that you can exchange your tools of destruction for tools of construction. And it was a huge success. Evidently, this program, after it had been running for 9 years, collected more than 600,000 guns, which is amazing. I don't even know how there are that many guns in Mozambique, evidently. So they collect 600,000 guns, and this group takes at least a portion of them and starts welding these guns together into this tree form. So all of this is made out of ammunition, guns and ammunition clips, those sort of things. And then they also made animals. There's some animals that surround the tree of life. In what ways is this a tree of life? What's that?
It neglected death.
It neglected death. Yeah, good. I mean, it represents a tree of life, but in a pretty tangible way, it might really symbolize a broader renewal, redemption of life in this area. That each of these guns is willingly given up, exchanged for something more life nurturing. And I don't think we should say that, you know, all guns are bad, or I don't know, protecting yourself is bad or something like that. But certainly in this case, where you have civil war, where things have become so poisonous and so violent that disarming is an active kind of willful move toward peace. This is a sort of tree of life. And it comes out of not so much a bunch of artists deciding what they're going to say or do for in the context of a gallery or a museum, but artists working with a group of people and with a movement that's going on in a place and constructing items out of that process. So the object is a result of a larger process and points to that larger process. This was exhibited in the entryway to the British Museum, I believe, is where it is.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.